Hello and welcome to Libertas Europae. Today I want to talk about revolution. So if you look at popular culture, revolution is all over the thing. Revolution is sexy, revolution is exciting, revolution is romantic. So you have all sorts of depictions of oppressive regimes and power structures, and our brave heroes have to struggle against this. You have this in Star Wars, you have this in The Hunger Games, you have this in films like Braveheart, like V for Vendetta, like all these films about the American Revolution. It's all over the place. And the thing is, rebellion makes for a nice underdog story. I get it. It provides an easy justification for our heroes to commit all sorts of violence without having to deal with moral qualms. If you have these stormtroopers, you can just kill them, no problem. Kill the stormtroopers, rescue the princess, awesome. No need for any sort of moral struggle over that. That's just very straightforward. Problem I have with that is that I think violent revolution is hardly ever justified, and I think that almost all attempted, as well as almost all successful revolutions throughout all of history, were a mistake. My reason for believing that is not that I believe in some sort of obligation of the people to obey their rulers. It doesn't really matter to me whether the rulers justify their rule through an appeal to tradition or the natural order or the divine right of kings or the mandate of heaven or the general will or the good of the nation or being democratically elected. I don't really care. I do believe that people have a right to alter or abolish a government that no longer has the consent of the governed. I fully agree with that. But what I want to argue here is that it is almost always imprudent for the people to try to overthrow or alter the government by violent means. There are many problems with violent revolution. So first of all, violent revolution is bloody. It's going to claim many lives. And revolutions very often fail. And if they do, you have lots of blood spilled, and the government just reimposes its rule and is probably after that going to be even more tyrannical. And perhaps most importantly, even if you have a successful revolution, frequently the government that's going to be instituted after the revolution is going to be even more oppressive than the government it replaced. It's because war is a very fertile breeding ground for oppression. In war, who can afford to have respect for things like individual liberty, freedom of expression, private property, due process, humane treatment of prisoners? All these things frequently go out of the window if you have a life and death struggle. And even after this revolutionary war has been won, this new regime typically only has a very tenuous grasp on power and often will just continue its repressive wartime measures, try to root out the old loyalists and new revolutionaries who might want to overthrow this new order. That's because often revolutions are fought by a disparate coalition that's united by little more than their opposition to the current regime. But once the current regime is gone, all these old factions re-emerge, and you have a power struggle that often leads to another war. And the thing is, after you've already established that violence is an okay means to overthrow the established order, well, then it's very easy for the next group to come in and say, okay, we're now going to overthrow this new oppressive regime. So once the floodgates of revolution have been thrown open, blood is often just going to keep gushing through them. So what do you need to have for a revolution to avoid these pitfalls? What do you need for a successful revolution? I would argue that there are four primary requirements that unfortunately almost no revolution actually meets. So the first would be that the government that you're rebelling against actually has to be highly oppressive. And I don't just mean oppressive by some sort of ideal standard, but oppressive compared to other governments that exist in comparable countries. So a good example of such a government would be North Korea. It really is extremely oppressive, and compared to South Korea, or even compared to China, compared to basically all the other Asian countries, it is terrible. It's just completely terrible. But if you look at, say, the current US government, or Germany or France or any other Western governments, these countries are pretty good. They're not perfect, they're far from perfect, but they're pretty good. And yes, every government is oppressive in some ways, but if you overthrow a government like this, chances are what's going to replace it is going to be much worse than that. The second thing you need to have good prospects to actually win. And you also want to be able to do so decisively. It's no good if you just get bogged down in an endless war that just takes years and years and years and lots of people die. And that's often just a conflict where all sides lose. So for example, this is what happened in the American Revolution. First of all, the chances of success were not very good at the outset. And even though the revolutionists did win, it took them a very long time. And a lot of blood was spilled and a lot of property destroyed, and the revolution caused enormous economic problems. Another example would be the current Syrian Civil War. It's gone on for years and years, and there's no end in sight. Lots and lots of people have died, cities have been destroyed, and for what? Like, who's actually the winner here? No one. No one wins in that conflict. Another example of this will be violent would be slave revolts. If you just look throughout history, slave revolts just don't work. Now, slave revolts certainly fulfill the first criterion. It's a very oppressive regime that they're overthrowing, but you actually have to win too. Because if you're just going to do rebellion for rebellion's sake, well, you might as well just kill yourself. That's probably a more efficient way of escaping from slavery, if that's what you're after. But the actual slave rebellions that work in history, is very hard to find those. The best example is the Haitian Revolution, and even that one is only technically successful. So yes, the government was overthrown, but Haiti is an enormously unsuccessful country. It's by far the poorest country in all the Americas. Very low standard of living, low life expectancy, the place is just terrible. So if that's the best a slave rebellion can do, that's not very encouraging. So the third is you need to have realistic aims. If the goal of a revolution is to fundamentally reshape society from the ground up, to reshape human nature itself, chances are that your efforts will just fail miserably, and in trying you'll just leave a long trail of corpses behind you. So the French Revolution is a good example of that. Yeah, this revolutionary terror, they tried to remake all the institutions of society, and all we got out of that was the metric system. Everything else just was a complete failure. Another example of that would be the Bolshevik Revolution. You try to establish this new socialist man who's going to be selfless and wants to work for the common weal and so on, and it's a complete failure, of course. And to make socialism work at all in some sort of remote fashion, these governments had to be enormously oppressive and just kill a whole bunch of people and have these massive prison camps and so on. Complete disaster. A counterexample, a revolution that actually does a good job in this case, would be, for example, the American Revolution. So in this regard, the American Revolution is good because it did not seek to fundamentally alter the nature of government. So it did not completely overthrow the status quo. It mostly sought to return to practices and forms of government that had been in place during the colonial period. Certainly there were some innovations, no one's going to deny that, but it did not fundamentally seek to overthrow the way society works. And then number 4 and final point is your revolution should be based on a desire for liberty and not on envy or hatred or revenge. Because if and when you win, you need to be gracious to your defeated enemies. you need to pardon at least the rank and file of the supporters of the old regime. And that's a minimum requirement really for a country to heal and to recover, and that will go a long way in forming good relations with other governments. Because if you just keep slaughtering people during the revolution and the aftermath, you're most likely going to have to keep being extremely violent, because that's the only way you can cling to power, because people don't see you as being legitimate and they don't voluntarily submit to you. The only way they submit to you is through fear and intimidation. And this in turn will make all your neighbors very wary of you. You'll be hated and people won't trust you. A good example here is again the Haitian Revolution. Yes, here you have this successful slave revolt. They have these very legitimate grievances against the French colonists. But still, these Haitian revolutionaries just killed or drove away basically all the white people living on their land. And this included even people who had not owned slaves and people who were in fact opposed to slavery and who even had supported the revolution in some cases. So if you do that, you're going to be a pariah. And that's what happened in the case of Haiti. And after the revolution, they were forced to pay huge indemnities to France, and ever since then the country has just been very poor and unsuccessful. So this list is not comprehensive. Doesn't mean that if you follow these 4 steps, your revolution is going to be a success. But if you violate these steps, it likely will lead to disaster. And the thing is, just almost no revolutions in all of history actually fulfill these 4 criteria. And really, if you look throughout history, it's very difficult to actually find revolutions that are successful in the sense of not just overthrowing the government, but replacing it with something that is better. And not just replacing it with something that's like slightly better, but better by a big enough margin to justify all the enormous slaughter and sacrifice and disruption and destruction that attends a revolution. So in this sense, violent revolution is almost never successful. And even though I'm someone who is very unsatisfied with the status quo in a lot of Western countries, these Western countries are generally better than most other places, I still think there's lots and lots of room for improvement. But the way to go about it is not through trying to overthrow any sort of government. It's through making gradual changes in a peaceful way. The way to improve society, the way to improve your government is in incremental ways, in peaceful ways. And this could be by voting for better people. I'm not particularly optimistic about that plan, but it could be through things like improving technology, through providing market alternatives to deficient government institutions, through innovation, through helping your fellow man. And often it's just a matter of making changes on a small scale. You don't necessarily need to have systemic change. The systems that are in place, especially in today's Western countries, while they're not great, they're good enough. And these systems allow for a lot of gradual improvement. And this is what we have to focus on, not on some sort of romantic notion of trying to overthrow the government. That's just almost certainly not going to work in your favor. So are there examples of actual good revolutions in the sense I've defined here? Yes, I think that. I think probably the best example would be the Romanian Revolution of 1989 that overthrew the socialist dictator Ceausescu and instituted a democratic and capitalistic government. And it's not like Romania post 1989 is perfect, or didn't become a utopia, but it was definitely an improvement. It was this very oppressive government before. These revolutionaries actually had a good chance of winning in 1989 because socialism was crumbling throughout Eastern Europe all around them. So this was sort of an idea whose time had come, and the revolution had realistic aims. You have these democratic governments in other European countries, you have capitalism working in other European countries, So why not try that in Romania? That's not a crazy idea. And it worked. It didn't work perfectly, but it worked well enough. And yes, indeed, it was based on a desire for liberty. And yes, of course, there was an element of hatred for Ceausescu and the socialists, but still the Romanians kept the bloodshed to a minimum. There were like a little over 1,000 people killed, and that's for a violent revolution that's very modest. So that's why I think that's the best example of a successful revolution. But as I said, there's not very many of those in all of history. Now, a lot of Americans are probably sitting there and saying, what about us? What about the American Revolution? Wasn't that a smashing success? I don't really think so. But that's really a video for another day. But if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and spread it on the social medias. And until next time, goodbye.